Hey, it is your buddy. Peace and harmony with you here today. Much love going out to all the beautiful, empowered harmonizers. We are zooming in and focusing in on a great viewer question who wants to dive in a little bit more in depth on what it means to let go of codependence or your false self as it relates to a relationship with a codependent, someone who has been a very formative or significant individual in your life and has created and fostered an emotional climate where they are more important than you. They are more important. Their happiness is the goal of the relationship. Their happiness is the end all be all. And then people find themselves either in a compulsive relationship where they're driven always to make this other person happy, always put them at the center of discussion, and never get a chance to really live. Never get a chance to really be or feel that sort of connection or bond with others as it relates to their own valuation of self, meaning self-esteem. Self-esteem is knowing that you are divine, that you are necessary, that you are important, and that you're part of a greater plan in life, bigger than just yourself. And that awareness, that consciousness needs to be sort of awoken up to or to be made aware. In other words, that movie that always comes around in the holidays, It's a Wonderful Life, they talk about how people oftentimes underestimate the power of their own goodness and their impact in life. You never know that until you really recognize it. And so for a lot of people, they feel that they're not special. They're not as important, perhaps, as these other people in a covert narcissist relationship. So they tend to have this sort of boggy sense of self and unmotivated. Oftentimes it can get even worse, complex PTSD, and they don't really sort of get ignited in their passion. And so there becomes really this flawed thinking, which really becomes a false self in order to adapt and adjust to relationships. So the false self becomes as required, like Dr. Craig Malkin, people becoming an echoist. So it's just like they become empty within of their own needs. And oftentimes this might be very pious. A lot of religions, I think, really sort of cultivate this as, piousness, going without food, going without water, going without relationships, to bring you closer to God. I think a lot of people might have that as part of their own philosophy as, when they sort of are in that self-deprivation relationship that can oftentimes be created as a result of being in a relationship with someone who is narcissistic or psychopathic, particularly of the covert variety, because it goes unacknowledged and unacknowledged and unvalidated for so long. In other words, it can be there sort of bubbling underneath the surface, but doesn't get attended to or rectified or resolved. And oftentimes it can be very deep. The hurt can be very deep. And then people then will develop their lives kind of pivoting around this person in their family. In other words, they feel that they can never grow personally to the extent that this other individual has the opportunity to. They then feel there's no opportunity for me. It's too late for me. And they never take the first step. And so oftentimes a false self is then developed. A false self meaning thoughts that are flawed or that are as a result of the treatment or treatments of this individual or individuals. In other words, a victim mentality, an angry mentality. Oftentimes this is fueled oftentimes by events that kind of snowball, and then the thinking goes way erratic. And then they develop this sort of false self. In other words, undervaluing of themselves, which is not the natural state. It is really a learned state that you do not feel valued. You have been taught that. Even people who have, very severe complex PTSD, if you read Pete Walker's book, he talks about how a lot of those feelings have been taught to that individual. They have learned to those reactions. And even though they are life hindering and life thwarting and, thwarting of your happiness, they can be unlearned. Unlearned. So these are learned behaviors, learned responses that in your repertoire you have rehearsed and reinforced and rememorized and taught your body to feel again and again and again. That is known as the fight or flight, which can be, it's really, that whole system is enacted when someone feels at threat, when someone feels that there is danger present. So, it is the ultimate self-preservation. And that oftentimes will continue even though the stimulus is not present. In other words, it carries over into other areas of your life, your education, your employment, how you care for yourself, how you relate to yourself and then others. And to the extent to which you feel that you are developing or pursuing your passion or your creativity or your productivity or your motivation and where you really go in life. It's the difference between sort of a very passive and mediocre feeling towards being happy, fulfilled, and joy. And that is not only reserved for the very few. Joy is for all. Happiness is for all. Fulfillment is for all. But oftentimes we're locking the door to that happiness. It's just right outside the door, but people never take the first step or they never look in the direction of their joy. They've developed a false self which is derived by the thoughts that create that false self. I am unintelligent. I am ugly. I am unlovable. Studies have been shown that children who do not receive enough attention, they then assimilate and extract the feeling that they are unlovable. So that's what they derive out of the situation. It's how they interpret it. So you have to understand that a lot of the thought patterns that you have developed and devised and feel that you live by and are you have often been derived by erroneous thinking or flawed thinking to arrive at those conclusions and to live by that conclusion. The mind, it's to understand how the mind works. The mind wants the familiar. The mind likes repetition. It wants to go automatic pilot. It wants to set it and forget it. It's based on that reinforcement. So if you reinforce, I am unlovable, I don't have what it takes, I am unlovable, I don't have what it takes, and you're subconsciously playing that track, then you're gonna basically get what you're programmed your mind and conditioned your mind to receive. Now, flawed thinking, meaning a false self, meaning this has been created as an adaptation called a defense mechanism earlier in your life, which means defense mechanisms which you then picked up along the way in order to cope. But a lot of people carry these defense mechanisms way far into life, farther than they need to, even when the threat is no longer there. They create conflict. They create complexity. They create confusion. They go back to that sort of baseline agitated state, and they're creating these problems. It's a constant creation by their false self of all these, I call it like engineered chaos. So they wonder why life is not getting better. Why aren't things resolving? Why are there so many problems all the time? And why don't I experience more joy? Why don't I experience more happiness? It's oftentimes because that false self that said, you know what, because of this, I have to build myself up, I need to overeat, and that's the only pleasure that I have. Or because, it's a coping mechanism that you picked up back in the day, maybe in your childhood, teens or 20s, maybe it's eating, drinking, smoking, drugging, compulsive debting, compulsive cleaning, whatever it is that you picked up that you had to do to protect yourself, now is still part of your behavioral repertoire and your emotional repertoire. Even though that stimulus is no longer present, you're still identifying with it. Meaning the thoughts, the feelings, you're still, identifying I am with. And people say, that's, and oftentimes so, the depression that goes on for way too long, I'm not really a depressed person. I'm a very happy, affectionate person, but this and this happened, and this has made me depressed. And then they then reinforce that, if that makes any sense, rehearsing and rememorizing, and then they stay depressed for weeks and months, and they mope around, and then they don't take a shower, and they don't do their laundry, and they don't eat right, and they don't go leave their house, or they don't pursue their job, or all these different things that then happen as a result. And then and then they're like, I need to snap out of it, and they're realizing that depression was created by a false self. So how do you get away from that? How do you reinvent? How do you shed and let go of that false self? Is to understand that sort of, inhibitory behavior, that making yourself small, that making yourself too meek. Not that you're not humble, because humbleness and coming from a state of calm, in a state of presence, is where your empowerment is going to be. But if you're wrapped up in all the compulsions of the false self, in other words, all that you have picked up and sort of the meaning that you have derived, or how you have interpreted situations as the end all be all. Oftentimes it's the interpretations that you derive and extract from something that's then weighing you down. Does that make any sense? It's very important that you understand. It's a dive deep, but it's very important to understand how the mind and the subconscious work, and how it keeps you stunted, stifled, and oftentimes a false self where you're not really opening up. It keeps you closed and shut off, emotionally asphyxiated, emotionally stunted. Even though there's more to you, you're not expressing it. So there's something within you called the divine intelligence, which is creative, which is productive, which has interaction with life, which has transactional feeling in life. You breathe and respirate. You have an interaction with life. It's a two-way street, and to open up that receptivity towards the good needs to be opened up so that you can receive compliments, so that you can be in touch with your talents and not feel shy, embarrassed, guilty, ashamed. The toxic shame that keeps people from create their own creativity. It isn't good enough when it is. It is. It is. Oftentimes people don't feel it, but you need to feel it to believe it and then do it. So taking that radical action out of the false self means to let go of the thought patterns that float past you throughout the day, throughout this video, that you can understand that you have been holding yourself back with. It's to let go of those negative thoughts that you may be well rooted, several decades ago. The root might be 3 feet long. Hey, you got to get down in there all the way to that 3 feet root and pull her up. You got to loosen up, you got to loosen up that ground around it. You got to get some tools and shovel and get down and understand how far it goes so you can get to the tip of that root and pull it all the way out. And you'll feel so much relief once you understand how you had perhaps created a false self to adapt, adjust, and cope with a situation where there was a threat, In other words, your growth was a threat, your happiness was a threat, your voice was a threat, your needs were a threat, and it could not be reinforced for whatever reason. The people weren't strong enough, they didn't have the time, they didn't have the emotional intelligence, they didn't have the money, they didn't have whatever. I mean, it's important to understand that you look at those coping mechanisms and are willing now to let them go, that you are safe enough to realize that you don't want to bog yourself down with dysfunctional behaviors anymore because they no longer serve you. Staying in fight or flight, being addicted to anger. Oftentimes, anger is the result of not feeling heard, validated, listened to, or protected. In other words, it's perpetual fight or flight. It's violation energy. It's saying, you don't own your feelings. I own your feelings. I am responsible, and you're going to do as I say, and that is the end of the story. So it's like back, like a parent with a child, and then that child who doesn't get the candy that they wanted or doesn't get the bubble gum is still throwing the tantrum, and it just perpetuates through the years. They are allowing themselves to be defined by that past experience. And usually, if you look back and reflect, there's usually 1, 2, or maybe even 3 very formative sort of crossroads experience where that feeling started. It started there, and it developed from there, it expanded from there, it ignited from there, it took a life, an entity of its own from there. And it can be oftentimes, especially if your parents were of this and they did not guide you in your emotions and help you to shape them and say, hey, because there's a bully at school, we're going to do this, or because this happened, I'm going to protect you and help you settle down here. Maybe you never learned the skills of how to settle down and focus, or to believe that your empowerment comes from a place of stillness, in a place of mindfulness, in a place of focus where you can discern things and you can get in touch with your own present moment and not be carried away by, this fantasy of being violated and being charged up in addiction, because the negative feelings, as all newspapers and newscasters know, that the negative emotions rise quicker than the positive. If you see on the front of a newspaper, it's going to be a sunny day today, people aren't going to buy it. They're going to be like, so what, who cares? If they hear about all the negative, then they'll, oh my God, let me pick it up, and then they are prone to get on the anger wagon very quickly. It is just how the physiology works with human beings. So the false self, it's to look at and say, you know what? Because back in, before, because of this and this relationship, I had to adjust and cope by doing such and such. In other words, I had to become the perfect this. I had to become the perfect that. I had to over-obligate my time. I couldn't say no. I couldn't have my own career. I couldn't have time to read. I couldn't have time to exercise. I couldn't have time to go play bridge, chess. I couldn't play ping pong. I couldn't play video games. Whatever it is, part of your false self got into a deprivation state that you've always wanted to fulfill. So realize that oftentimes when you're in a relationship with someone who acts out a persona, such as a narcissist or a psychopath, a false self is going to be required to be created as a result. In other words, false people create falseness in others. Real people create realness in others. So it's to understand that sort of, mirror neuron and symbiotic relationship that energetically people share. So that's why it's so important that you get the strength and the courage to let go of your false self. Even there's been studies, a great colleague, Vincent Jenna, who is a wonderful speaker, Vincent Genna. You can check out his website, vincentgenna.com. I would highly recommend a session with him, one-on-one. He is phenomenal speaker and has developed some great oratory presentations. Is an orator. I mean, he is phenomenal, phenomenally gifted and amazing human being. I mean, just really spectacular. So, and as I was getting back, so I was making a point here about him. Oh, geez. Okay, let me circle back. But anyway, yes, he talks about like the man-made self. In other words, that is developed through coping. And that when you're in that state, you don't really feel that you're living. Oh, no. Here's the example. Here's the statement that he made. So he, back in his career earlier as a social worker, he then was working in hospice and helping people to cross over to the other side. And what he found is that as people neared the end of their life, they oftentimes didn't really get to know or feel that they had a personal relationship with the divine, with the Creator. That they were in, the Bible Belt, where they were expected to be a certain way in their church. And it was reinforced how they would dress, how they would sing, and it was just like a false worship for them, oftentimes in that area of the country, which I believe is like the South or wherever the Bible Belt you might consider it to be. And that it was very shocking because all throughout their life they thought one thing, but then as their life became more real and it became more important for them to get real with their life and who they were, that they really felt that they never got to know the Creator, that they had a false faith. And oftentimes I feel that false self needs to be acknowledged and let go so you can have a real bond and connection and feel sort of that really wonderful experience of being saved by an awareness, an opening of consciousness so that you can be true, so you can live your truth, so you can live authentic, so you can be happy, and that you're not having to live less than all the time. And I'm glad that we brought that up because I think it's so important that I think a lot of people are going to resonate with the fact that they've had to put on a false happy, a false smile, a false frown, doing things where they're over obligating versus being real and then keeping those things in temper. So in other words, looking at the behavioral habits of things that no longer serve you, the anger blow-ups, when was that started? When was that as a coping mechanism? When was that your go-to, escalation? And particularly those feelings which are escalated, meaning escalated way up or escalated way down, those are going to become addictive because they're heightened states of arousal and the body loves to go back to that state. And if it doesn't have that state, it's going to find something to be angry about or it's going to find something to be depressed about. This is known as a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it's also a cycle of emotional addiction. And if knowing that to be the case, so knowing a little bit about how the body likes to run on automatic pilot, to what degree are these negative emotional states on automatic pilot for you and out of your control? To what degree are these disturbing to you, your happiness in your life, and you're sick and tired of things flying off the handle, you're sick and tired of not handling things the way that you want, you're sick and tired of things getting ugly, you're sick and tired of there being a smear campaign and not liking the way that you handled it? Well, enough is enough. Get to the point where you're like, I am so done with this. I'm so done with it. I am done. And I'm sick of whatever, breaking this, of, texting this, of missing my sleep, of missing my happiness, of missing my shows, of missing my job, whatever it is, Usually there's something that you're very sick and tired of missing in the way. So you need to get some separation and then hold that space for your truth. Hold the space. Hold the space. In other words, the words might go through, I'm so angry, I'm so frustrated, I'm so disgusted. Allow those to pass through and hold the space and just breathe through it. And catch yourself either wanting to text or wanting to do whatever, that coping mechanism, that fight or flight. Catch it at that, what they call the pregnant moment, and let it go. Don't give birth to that ugliness. Don't give birth to that backslide. Don't give birth to that bad habit where you overdrink and feel sick, overeat and feel sick, overspend and feel unhappy, or underspend and don't have anything. Never going out, never having fun. Look at how that false self has not served you. It might have had to be there for you back in the day, but it's not meant to be the only tool in your toolbox. And, I recommend looking at the full spectrum and percentage of your emotions throughout the day. Into what percentage are you experiencing joy, contentment, peace, and harmony? If it's a very little sliver, then that should be a wake-up call. If you could draw a big pie, and to say, what percentage of my pie am I feeling empowered, at peace, content, focused, joyful? I'm feeling a sense of beauty. I'm acknowledging the beautiful sky, and if that sliver is way too small, you need to enlarge the sliver and open it up so that your true self is really getting a chance to live and being enacted. In other words, if you're not having enough beauty in your life, take 5 minutes and go over to the window or take a 5-minute walk and say, man, that was awesome. Get some fresh air. Change up the routine and break the pattern. You'll find that you're then enacting your free will, and you'll be guided more and more, and you'll strengthen and ignite that security that gives you a sense of empowerment. You have to have the courage, though, to take those baby steps. And it might seem laughable how baby the steps are, but that is where you begin. That's when you enact the change. That's when you engage in neuroplasticity, changing the wiring of your brain and your own neurophysiology to make the difference and make an impact and influence your life for the better, the true and the genuine, and you're able to be fully present. This is your buddy, Peace and Harmony, with you here today, and I hope that these videos do help. Please share, please subscribe, and please donate for more great tools, videos, discussion, and support. Hold the space for your truth. Hold the space. Get used to it. Do it like an exercise. Do it like an exercise, just like you're, doing a barbell or some weights. Hold the space for your truth. Allow the anger to dissipate, all those, coping mechanisms that you used to run to. Realize that you had been taught those. They're no longer serving you, and have the courage and freedom to let those go and see through to your success. Do it today, do it now, and repeat. Have a beautiful day.